you started it. So, hey.
Yep.
Hey, this is Brian Carter, and I am here with Kathy Klotz-Guest and Michael Margolis. Today we're going to talk about StoryDNA. Basically, how do companies create stories that will help their businesses? And Michael's an awesome guest for this because he does a ton of work in the area of story. So does Kathy, and I kind of don't. I I'm a marketing guy in all different areas, and I'm fascinated by story. I've been taking all these screenwriting courses, and we're just going to have a conversation today about stories. So let's go a little bit into the background of Michael Margolis. Michael, why don't you start off and tell us how you got started in storytelling?
Yeah, I got into story actually, to be honest with you, Brian, because I used to suck at it. And so, like a lot of us, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, I've always been somebody who was good with words, and yet I would find myself in certain situations rather tongue-tied and twisted. And once I was in a very high-stakes situation in my early 20s, my first career. I was a social entrepreneur. I was basically applying business principles to social change, and I'd gotten, big-time funding from big foundations, and was kind of on a fast track. And I had this really important meeting with my board chairman, and I went into that meeting. And I was so prepared. I knew exactly what I wanted to say and needed to say, but I got into the meeting, and I got so tongue-tied and twisted that I literally started choking on my own tongue, right, to the point where I was like foaming at the mouth. And this turned into a medical emergency intervention, which you can imagine my absolute utter embarrassment and sheer terror. And I came out of those experiences really just going, what the heck just happened? And part of it was about being comfortable, like me being comfortable in how I showed up in the situation. But another part of it had to do with feeling misunderstood or lost in translation. That the version of the story that I had about who we were and where we were going was different than the version of the story that some other people on the board were sort of advocating. And there was that frustration of like, but don't you see? Like, don't you see what I see? No. Like, this other story feels so constrictive. And it was, in many ways, that frustration and disappointment that led me, for the last 13 years to really go deeper into the heart of storytelling, and specifically, how do you take anything new or different and translate that into cultural acceptance? Like, really, storytelling from the place of innovation has been my greatest place of passion and inquiry, kind of where myself and my organization Get Storied, where we really like to geek out.
What does that mean, storytelling from a place of innovation?
That's a great question. Well, look, I mean, innovation is it's actually what so many of us are doing. Like, so every entrepreneur, every leader, every marketer, every creative, like, we're all basically doing something that is new or different, something that maybe hasn't been done before or hasn't been done in this way. And so, our entire culture and our economy is being driven around innovation. And the challenge with innovation is it sets you up to be presenting a story that by definition may actually be confrontative. You're introducing a story that was maybe outside of other people's sphere of familiarity or out of the norm. And so it presents really deep archetypal issues around communications and relationship, and whether people say yes or no or WTF or like all the stuff that's around how we ultimately connect and inspire and influence others. So, and a lot of people think about business innovation, which is a really huge area that many companies are going, sort of focused on. But I'm also equally passionate about social innovation, which is obviously not just in the nonprofit and social change world, but the fact that any innovation has a social or human component. And that's where the story gets really interesting, because there's layers to a story that you have to unpack when you're dealing with the human experience. And it's a humbling path. It's a humbling process that everybody's going through. How do you create an idea that travels?
So let's talk about that, because that's where we unpack some really interesting things. And we've all studied storytelling, and Brian, you say you're a marketer. I think we're all marketers because I think we're all storytellers, and everybody is, and that's really the ultimate goal, is to tell that story. So Michael, what makes a great story? And I know there's different types of stories, but what makes a great story?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. What do you guys think makes a great story?
An amazing villain or challenge, and a big goal.
Mm.
And yeah, sometimes it doesn't even matter who that hero is too. It's just like, okay, I give up.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's one that I have probably every day, and I know you probably do too, Michael. I think it's to me, stories are how we make meaning of the world. So we're always telling stories, and at its most basic, it's how we fit in the world. So I think a great story has to answer where do I see myself in this. And I think change. I do a lot because probably, and Brian's an improviser as well. One of the things I think a lot about from the improv stage is narrative arcs. So who has been changed by the end of a story? I want my audience to be changed. I want to be changed. Somebody, one of the characters, a protagonist, somebody else has to be changed. There has to be some kind of full emotional arc. And so I think a lot about what change happens in that story, and the optimism and the hope that comes at the end of that, because those, to me, I think are really important parts of a story that I think get overlooked in the business world a lot of times.
Yeah, and speaking of that arc then, so Michael, coming from where you were foaming at the mouth, did you have like a circle? Did you have a...
I'm still foaming a little bit. Is that a little schmeck right there?
Let's talk about him foaming at the mouth.
What is that? What is that?
Did you have like a full circle moment where then you learned enough about story to where you have like a victorious moment with story that you could share with us?
I don't really think or live in those terms, to be honest with you, Brian. I mean, look, through the years we've worked with everybody from NASA to Google to Deloitte to Ernst & Young, Marriott, UN Foundation, Nature Conservancy. I mean, we're doing lots of big stuff all the time. But I take it at a very humble level. I mean, when you're working with story, you're dealing with the sacred stuff of life. And I mean, back to your question, like what makes for a good story. Part of the reason I paused on that, and it's not a reflection of you guys, but it's more of like sometimes some of those questions to me, they're such cliche questions that that's sort of like there's a danger in the world of marketing of us to be like, oh, storytelling, it's the next thing. Let's learn storytelling so we can master how to be more empathic and humanistic so we can dominate the marketplace and sell more shit. And I'm not saying that's what you guys at all are about in the least bit. I mean, I love you guys.
Totally am. That's all I want. I want to basically carpet bomb consumers. That's all I want to do. But there's a caution in there, cautionary tale about how we work story, and this is the thing actually. I mean, I've been doing work in the world of storytelling for 13 years, and for all of the growing buzz and hype and attention, and it's a wonderful thing. We're very invested. I mean, Get Storied is a global learning community for business storytelling with courses and membership and a conference and all of that. But at the same time, there's an aspect to story that if one just tries to work it at a superficial level and not just a mechanical level, it will chew you up and spit you out.
Yeah.
And this is actually why, as a so-called marketplace or sector, it's still a very nascent marketplace or sector that's still very fragmented, very mom and pop, a lot of individuals who come into the work of story from an interesting path. Some people are performance storytellers, others maybe are writers and journalists, others are coming from the agency world, and there's many other varieties out there. But there's an aspect to doing story work that is a really high bar, and we sniff it out. So back to your question, what makes for a good story? I would answer in the following ways, which is the heart of the storyteller becomes the heart of the story.
Yeah.
So you're arguing for a more organic kind of discovery of the stories that are there than a mechanical construction.
No, I mean, we teach structure. You need structure and form, but here's where I challenge a lot of the common accepted approach, which is you can't. In my experience, it doesn't work to take classic storytelling structure and drag and drop it into a business, marketing, or transformational context. It comes off as heavy-handed and saccharine 95% of the time. And the reason for that is classical storytelling structure is morality tale. Right, so back to what Kathy mentioned, and it's a fair point. The origins of story was we used to sit around the fire and tell stories about this is how the world works, this is your place in the world, right? And now with that though, there were stories about don't stray too far because if you do, bad things will happen, right? The raven will eat the rabbit, and if you really step out of line, don't think you can come back around here anymore, right? So here's what you have to remember about story. There's something timeless about story and some things that are changing. So here's what's timeless. Story has always been a location device. So that's one of the great things about storytelling is literally we're helping people to figure out where am I? Where are we? Yeah. And this is the question in the back of any audience's mind. Do I belong in that story?
Yeah.
That's great.
This happens literally when we're going through our Facebook stream, in our email inbox. Everybody's demanding attention from us. What we're unconsciously asking ourselves is, do I belong in that story? Right. So story is a location device. But here's the one little thing I'll finish on here. So in the classical sense, story was also a control mechanism. It actually was the ways that we define the boundaries of what was right and wrong, what was acceptable, not acceptable, possible, not possible, real, not real, and so on. I mean, that's why it used to be a very few elite controlled the stories of our lives. The shaman, the elder, the priest, our parent, our politician, like a very few that got to tell the stories. Now, what's completely being blown open now is the democratization of storytelling. The fact that we all get to tell our own stories about our own life more than ever, or that we get to even interpret the story of what a brand's communicating to us or what a company or an organization's communicating to us. So this is why we need actually a new rhetoric, new structures for storytelling that go beyond morality tale. Because we don't want story to be a control mechanism, we want story to be an empowerment vehicle. It's about transportation. It's about where does that story actually take you, and do people feel like they can go somewhere with that story? And that requires a big shift in our thinking and orientation. So, anyways, I'm being the provocateur here, but
that's great.
But I hope it's taken. I hope it's taken in a warm way. Yeah.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So if we actually want to look at so many of us are trying to produce and champion some kind of change or, again, innovation in the world, right? Now, the way we've all been taught to think, right, could be summed up in the following fashion. The entire rhetoric, our mindset for thinking of our culture today is problem, solution, right? And here's the thing. We've all been taught that's the smart thing to do, right? This is management 101. This is the scientific method. You find a problem, you develop a solution. And I'm not suggesting we should give up problem solution. That often is, even in innovation, it is where it's like the pebble in the shoe. Like you see something and you're like, well, that sucks. No, I think I could do it better than that. Or you're like, oh, no, I'm not going to accept this. Or, wow, this is really curious. I want to figure out a different way of doing it. So we usually, our solution or the breakthrough comes in response to something. The challenge is that where we miss out is that problem solution might be how you got to the insight, but it is not the communication structure to effectively share it with others. And I'll explain. You want me? I can explain why if you want, real quick. So here's what happens. Think about this. Problem solution actually is kind of a crappy story because you're starting with a problem, which actually usually makes people feel terrible. I mean, we don't. Most of us don't like if it was a simple problem, we would have already figured it out. So you're usually talking about a problem that's a pretty complex problem. So you're talking about something that actually generates cortisol, the stress response in the body, right? Well, cortisol is a stress response. That is fight or flight. That is not creating a receptive field for your story. That is putting people on the defensive. And keep in mind, most of the time, people are complicit, if not responsible, for that problem, whoever your audience is. Like that problem you're talking about, like they're involved in that problem. So people can't help but personalize the problem. Like, oh, you're reminding me of that thing I suck at. Or I feel like you're judging me that I'm wrong or bad or stupid. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, oh, but don't worry, I've got the solution. And what we're doing then, right, problem solution is a closed loop. The story's over. You wrapped it up in a pretty little bow. You basically, right, like I basically, made you feel bad and said, but don't worry, I've got it figured out. So we're basically saying to people, okay, the story's over, you can go home now. So here's the simple reframe. And this is the basis of a 6-step methodology we teach in one of our courses called Lean Story. But this is in the most simplest form. Instead of problem solution, you tell the possibility obstacle story. Okay? And here's the cool thing about that. All you're doing is reversing the polarity. So instead of going minus plus, you go plus minus. Right? Problem is minus, plus is solution. Possibility is a plus, obstacle is a minus. Just that simple shift completely changes people's ability to actually identify and to sort of lean into the story without being triggered in a fight or flight response kind of way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before, when I was asking for an example, I meant like an example story. So, like, can you? I don't know if we can go.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know if we can go back to that because now maybe we're too far away. But can you give me an example story for what you just talked about?
Sure. I mean, we were working with one organization that's one of the largest technology companies in the world, and they're in the financial tech sector, and their problem was we need to sell more of our technology in emerging markets. And the solution was, okay, well, let's hire more salespeople to go and build out that emerging market. Okay, is that an exciting story? Do any of us give a shit about that story? Right? I mean, that is just like, wah, wah, okay. I mean, it's very rational, it's very logical, but so what? Now, if you reverse the polarity and you do the possibility obstacle story, so what is the big deal about this story? Well, here's what's interesting. What they found is in many of these emerging markets, when both big companies as well as the government agencies start using their technology, it literally builds the market. It actually creates a higher functioning marketplace because of the information at people's fingertips for decision making. So from like an economic market dynamic perspective, their technology builds a more stable and growing market with any of these emerging markets, right? So now, like, that's interesting. Like, wow, we have a technology that literally advances economic development, at least at a macro level. You make all the arguments about, does it trickle down or whatever else, but certainly, like, macroeconomically, our technology not only moves markets, it literally builds a market that's an emerging market. Now, the obstacle is, how do we get our technology in the hands of the right government agencies and the right leading companies of that emerging market to create that ecosystem?
Got it.
Right? That's a completely different setup.
You're starting with what an amazing world we live in, or what amazing,
Yeah.
But,
and you're not saying that your customer's wrong. I mean, I think that the other thing that Michael's sort of if I can extrapolate first is the simplistic part of the problem solution is, you're wrong, you don't have the right solution, and people feel bad and judged. And I think we're all living every day being judged and told we're bad or we're wrong, or we're not doing something right. That's sort of the subtext, and there's no hope there. And I think it's reframing it to come from that place of possibility, for people to see themselves in that hope and that possibility.
Yeah. You know, Jonas Sachs in his book Story Wars, he talks about inadequacy marketing.
Yes.
And if you look at, you know, modern marketing of the last 50 years, there's an approach to marketing which, to a certain extent, is pathological.
Yeah.
It's literally oriented to let's identify your greatest vulnerability and insecurity. I'm going to poke at it. I'm going to prod it. I'm going to remind you of it. I might even invent something to make you feel even worse about your, you know, your inadequacy syndrome, and then I'm going to give you the pill or the solution or the, you know, the solve, you know, the salve for that pain.
Yeah.
And you know, that's worked for many, many years, but there's an aspect of it that's very coercive, and that is part of, you know, and this might be a bit, you know, some people might argue this is too ahead of its time, but this is where our culture is moving, where we're becoming more and more cynical and skeptical about that pathological inadequacy marketing approach, because we're bombarded by so much of it. And so it's yeah. So what how do you tell a story that's ultimately an empowering story for your audience? Because that's what people want. And we're in a transition stage. This isn't, you know, this is not a Pollyanna thing. I mean, there's still, and especially on the internet, right? The internet is fast twitch muscles that often still, like, it's impulsive, and it's often still being driven by inadequacy marketing and the ways of what converts more effectively. But there's an upswell of something else going on. So that's part of what I champion and advocate.
Well, you know, it's funny. There's something I came up with recently that fits this. I created like a grid where on one side you got selling or staking, and on the other side you got giving, which is altruism. At the top you've got emotion. At the bottom you've got rationality and intellect. So we're talking about moving from the taking emotional to the giving emotional. That's kind of what you're talking about.
I love that, Brian. Yeah, it's beautiful.
But do you have you, and this is, I mean, I don't even know if this is out there, but do you get to see any metrics on this kind of stuff? How do you measure story? And I mean,
return on story is what Brian and I talk about. We're like, does anybody measure that? What does it mean?
Do we get to split test story? Do we?
Yeah. So, so I have two answers to that question. All right. And am I allowed to swear on a podcast with you guys?
I'll
I think you've already said shit, and I think I just said it.
I gave you so much guff on the last one. All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, look, I mean, look, here's my honest first answer when people ask about the ROI of story. My first response is, I just don't give a fuck. Here's the thing. There's an aspect to it which is, if we too quickly, like if you're somebody that's like, well, give me the ROI of story, you're not right for story. Like, to me, that actually should be one of the bars of, it's kind of like when people are like, can you give me the, what is the ROI on actually caring about people and taking care of them? Like I'm fascinated with this, like, corporate social responsibility, and I mean, I started my career in the social enterprise world, but like people who are like obsessed with proving and validating that actually, if you're not a jerk, that actually will be better for business. To me, that's a given assumption, and somebody who's looking to be convinced of the value of story, don't waste your time. That's my advice for anybody, because there are an infinite number of leaders, of executives, of entrepreneurs and marketers who get it. And if the best way I can describe it to you is go where the soil is most fertile. If you're dealing with hard asphalt, nothing is going to actually get planted and grow in hard asphalt. So if somebody's starting from that place of the ROI of story, I pick up my ball and go play somewhere else. Now, that's the first answer. Okay, I do have a more sensible, practical answer that I'm also happy to share as well.
You mean you don't say that to customers?
Actually, Kathy, believe it or not, I do.
I do too. Well, and no, you do, and you should. But when you're done, I have a different definition of ROI. But I'll let you finish.
So the practical answer is, remember that people in business are already trying to accomplish and achieve lots of things. right? And usually when you sit down with a client, they have a wide range of strategic goals and objectives and desired outcomes. All right. And my advice to anybody who's working with story, don't go in and try to sell some story campaign as some extra thing that they need to add to their to-do list on top of everything else. Instead, find out what their business drivers are, what are they trying to achieve in the coming 6 months or a year, and then align how your story effort is going to accelerate or deepen their ability to execute on what they already need to execute on, right? And then the proof is in the pudding in terms of, at the end of the day, the power of story is about how it makes people feel. And based on how people feel, do you see greater engagement? Do you see greater excitement? Do you see greater participation? Whoever that audience is, if it's a business development side, if it's a fundraising investment side, whether it's a customer sales side, whether it's a community brand evangelizing side, I mean, all of the basic playbook of business still applies. What you're doing with story is you're basically introducing an accelerant, and one that is setting things up to basically have a better story to tell. Because if we go back to that example of that technology company that I mentioned, right, they're on the hook to deliver on, we need to sell more of our technology in these emerging markets. That was their business driver. And their solution was, well, let's add more salespeople. Boring. I mean, who the heck cares, right? Even for their frontline employees, is that what's going to is that what's going to marshal the troops? You know, is that what's going to give people some sense of meaning of like, wow, what we do here really matters? So part of this in whatever work people are doing is you got to find what's the story worth telling. What is it about what we do that really matters, and communicating that more coherently and effectively. And if you need to be convinced about that ROI, then you're probably somebody who's not ready for this work. Does that make sense?
It does, although what's interesting to me is because as you were talking, I was thinking, when you were explaining the first answer, I was already on to the second answer, because in my head, I do think there are returns. They're just not in the traditional way that people like to think about it. The way that, and maybe the word return has that connotation, so it throws people off. But it's what you said in the second answer, which is, it is engagement. It is about, are people caring in the company? Are they doing better work because of it? Are they all headed the same direction? Is story serving as a strategic GPS for your organization and telling you the things you'll do and what you won't do? And because those, to me, if you're better at that, then in some way you can kind of say, yeah, there are returns. There are signs. There are signs that show human returns that you are headed the right direction with story. Yeah. They're just not in the traditional way that I think a lot of people who are so bottom line dollar oriented get hung up on. But there's still, I think, signs and indicators, leading indicators that your story's working, and those are
absolutely
the things that I think you would say. And so I sort of already knew when you gave the first answer, I said, I know there's another answer he's going to give that I'm probably in line with.
Yes. Well, it's going to depend too on the type of company. Like if you've got a big public company where the story's going to go out there and you don't know where people are going to see it or how you're going to track those people, that's one thing. But if you're a direct marketer who's putting your story into an email or into a video that's on a squeeze page and you can track that stuff, then I put this video with the story here, I put this story in this video over here. You can measure a separate result if you wanted.
Well, absolutely. Again, it goes back to, if you're aligning yourself to the actual existing business drivers and strategic, goals, I mean, you can obviously measure, okay, are we delivering on our strategic goals and in those desired outcomes? I think one of the distinctions that I notice a lot of people, I mean, what we're talking about here, at least the way I approach story, is in a very meta manner. So a lot of people talk about stories, like in stories in the plural, and story as a finite object, like an anecdote is a story, right? And you can be, or like a customer testimonial as a single story, like story as like anecdote or vignette, and that's a really important part of the storytelling, discipline and application, is learning the small form, right, of a micro story. in my experience, though, is we tend to actually overemphasize the micro story and underemphasize or overlook the macro story. So a lot of our work within Get Storied has always been more at the meta or strategic story level. Because, again, if we think of story just as an anecdote, then it sort of marginalizes it as just this like little thing. When in fact, story is really, from our perspective, this is like about narrative intelligence. This is like design thinking. This is actually a set of principles and practices for how you look at the world, how you communicate, how you relate to others, and then how you take those principles and practices and apply it across all of business management, from strategy to marketing to innovation to team building to culture to social media and so on. But that's an important distinction that we constantly have to make, because people's natural starting point when they think of stories is they think of the micro story of a better anecdote.
Well, can you make that more concrete? The meta level story, is that like does that come in under branding?
You're
talking about management as well. You're talking about
it's your big story, your big organizational story.
It comes in at all those levels. So let's run through the cascade, Brian. So, for instance, a brand story, right? So a brand, rather, at the heart of a brand is going to be like a core story platform, and within that story is the origins of the brand, its ethos of like what it stands for, as well as ultimately sort of its impact in the world, the culture that it creates. Okay, similarly, if you have a strategic plan or a vision, which is another really important part of management, right? What's our strategy? What's our vision? Well, what is that? That's a story, right? You're helping people to understand this is the world, this is our place in the world, this is where we're going, this is where we're coming from, these are some of the obstacles in the way, right? So again, story. If you, bring it back to something like innovation or introducing a new product. In that case, it's like we have this thing. How do we get others to see and understand and appreciate this thing? How do you do that? By how you frame the story and how you bring together all these different components of, again, the making of this product, painting a picture of how you might use it, these scenarios of like, imagine being able to do this, imagine being able to do that. Oh, and look, we have stories from our customers, happy people who are using it. So, I mean, this is the challenge. What we're talking about is literally the foundational DNA structure of communications and of relationship. Everything we're building is based on, we're trading on stories.
Well, can I say then, please. Is it just then that story is a synonym for brand identity and messaging, or is there more to it than that?
There's more to it than that. So you're absolutely right. I do believe story is a synonym for brand messaging and identity. But guess what? Story is, think about it this way. If you're in front of an investor and you're trying to raise money, are they being sold by your brand messaging and identity? Is that what's going to seal the deal with them? They don't so much care about the brand, right? What they care about is the larger strategic story. I mean, look, Ben Horowitz, who's one of the leading venture capitalists of our time, co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the biggest, VC firms in the Valley. He says a company without a story is usually a company without a strategy. Right? So what he makes a very direct correlation, and this you see a lot in the startup world. A startup, you're basically making something out of nothing. Right? Like, I mean, think of how many startups have millions of dollars in funding and they are pre-revenue, right? Which is the biggest BS term out there. But like, how amazing is it that they get all of this investment and support and belief on something that like defies the physics of traditional business? How do you think they're doing that? They're doing it on the story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
No, it's interesting to hear you talk, because I think that's so true. I always look at it at the higher level, who you are in the world, what's your goal, what's your big reason for existing, and then everything else kind of falls under that. But what's interesting is that a lot of times, because story gets bandied about so much, that not only is there a clarification issue, but I always look at it as that top-down meta work that those of us who do that work has to map the stuff that happens at the brand identity and the tactical implementation level. the product stories that we have on a landing page and we split tests, that level of detail has to make sense.
Are you guys?
You know.
Are you guys getting really weird, bad distortion on the line all of a sudden?
Yeah, I did for a second. I think it's gone now.
No, I didn't hear any.
Oh, that was weird. Okay, well, at least it wasn't.
I think I missed the last sentence you said then.
Yeah.
I think the interesting part, because story means so many different things, is that we have that top level story and we have the bottom campaign stories, and those two kind of have to at some point meet in the middle, and they have to the tactical stuff has to support the larger story.
Yeah.
So the larger story is like the DNA of what is this all about?
The DNA,
what is this company?
The DNA, and that's hence the name of the podcast. That's where it came from, actually. is that it has to be in the fiber of the company. It has to be part of everything. I think, you know.
We just made ourselves look way smarter than we actually are, I think.
Look. You know, and I'm not trying to be coy with you guys, but the part of this line that we're taking in this conversation is that if you really start to work with story, you will quickly discover that you have a tiger by the tail. Yeah. This thing is so much bigger. Yeah. And one of the biggest illusions of life is when we think that actually we've mastered the story or that we control the story. Right? Because, think about it this way. We are completely lost, like how quickly we are lost without a story. Like we need a story in order to navigate, in order to locate, in order to know where the heck am I and where are we going, individually or even collectively. So how quickly we are lost without a story. Yet the opposite is true as well, which is how quickly we are stuck with a story. So a story can also be a place of deep suffering when we get too attached to one version of the story. And this is what often happens inside of companies, is the world is changing faster than we have the time to recalibrate our own story. And people experience this in their own lives as well. Like you go through a career reinvention, you go through major change, or maybe you make a big pivot in your life, and then the rest of your friends and family, it takes them like months or a year to catch up, and you're like, no, don't you get it, man? I'm this new person. Why do you keep seeing me like, how I used, the kid that you knew in high school? I'm not that person anymore. But that's the story they have of me, right? So there's an aspect of this which is learning how to become more fluid, more adaptive in how you constantly adjust and recalibrate your story, because we're dealing with more disruption than ever before. So the half-life of our story, including our big strategic story, is shorter and shorter and shorter. And this is a big place of pain that big companies experience, as well as individuals in, from a career marketplace perspective even, of like, how do I communicate who I am and what I do? Yeah.
Wait, when you say the half-life of the story, you mean our stories are dissolving, they're not lasting as longer?
Well, the effectiveness or the relevance of that story has a shorter and shorter half-life.
The life cycle, yeah. No, I think that's true. I think that is happening, and it's hard to do because people get attached, as Michael said, to those stories, and you spend all this work to find a brand story or a bigger, larger story of who you are in the world, your core purpose story, and it's hard for people to change. It's also slow to change if you're a big company because it drives everything you do. That's interesting,
Look, and having said all of that, as a brand or an organization, you do want to look at what aspects of what we do are timeless or speak to a universal theme. So take like Airbnb, for instance. And like their latest platform is Belong Anywhere, which is a brilliant platform for their story. Now, mind you, that has always been at the heart of their work, but they weren't ready. It wasn't the ripe time for them to put that story out into the world until about a year and a half ago. Because when they first came out, what they were struggling with was being taken seriously of, wait, what is this thing? So their first version of the story, and I'm not going to get the exact words right, but one of their first 10 employees, Venetia Pristavec, is our creative director on our team here at Get Storied, and she literally built their brand storytelling culture platform over 4 years. So the first version of their story, as she describes, was really more about like, we're creating a marketplace, like a marketplace about basically like, you know, and I'm gonna get the technical words wrong, but it was basically like the marketplace for finding, you know, places to rent anywhere in the world, and that had to be the first version of their story because people had no reference point. Wait, what is this thing? Why should I even take it seriously? And then once they prove the viability, oh, and actually part of the first version was also something about trust, like that was all about like creating a trusted marketplace to like rent a room or a house from strangers. Like it was, they were really had to work. That was the first version of the story that they really had to work and prove and validate. And it was then, as they've continued to grow and evolve, both with their success and a lot of the regulatory stuff they're coming up against, you know, with a lot of cities fighting against them, or really the hotel lobby fighting against them, they were like, well, let's come up with a story that's a universal platform. I mean, who can argue against belong anywhere, right? I mean, that would make like the crankiest old man just go, huh, okay, fine, you know, like you melt people with that platform. So it was always there from the beginning, but sometimes parts of the story aren't quite ready. They're not ripe for the conditions. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, would you describe it as new to the world things? When something's new to the world and people don't have a context or frame of reference for it, it's like, what is it? What is that? Yeah. I think eBay had the same thing. I remember when the Palm, because I'm going to date myself, when the very first Palm, the handheld computer came out, and I actually have one from 1996. I still have it, and I got it. It was one of the first ones that came out, and nobody knew what a handheld computer was. There was no frame of reference for it because Apple's Newton had failed, and nobody understood, how do I market this? How do I? Because the concept of a handheld, well, what do you do with that? And it's sort of, you know, how do you talk about handheld computing when nobody even knows that there's a market for it, because there isn't one, and what the heck to do with it? So it's interesting to see those stories. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the ways that I've been really exploring this lately, you know, and even for ourselves, because for, you know, more than a decade, we were really a consulting advisory company doing strategic storytelling for a lot of those big companies I mentioned. You know, and it was usually around change management, like big strategic change initiatives, and how do we tell the story? How do we get all these people on board and connected and engaged? But at the heart of our work, there's always been this mission around education, around learning, around empowerment. And so as we've, you know, in the last year, we've gone through a major pivot as an organization of really devoting ourselves to being in the education and learning business, and, you know, the courses that we create and all this. But in that process, like, you know, 13 years in of this journey, I kind of woke up about a month into that process last fall, and I was like, oh, crap. I'm running a product startup. And so it's been a really interesting place of education for me, because before I was running a consultancy, and that's a different type of business. Just as a consultancy, you can kind of run a lifestyle business, and it's just like you're trading not necessarily time for dollars, but it's a consultancy. It's like, all right, hey, I have advisory services, I help you with X, Y, and Z. Product startup, like you're actually looking at the mechanics of what scales and what's sustainable and what's critical path and what's MVP, and like this whole new level of discipline. And it was in that process that I came to realize the following, which I hope is useful to anybody on the storyteller's path, because it's the same thing as an entrepreneur. The entrepreneurial journey and the storyteller's journey are the same in the following ways. What we all have to do is bring integrity to the process of speculation. What I mean by that, right? Integrity to the process of speculation, because we are by definition doing something that's speculative. We're making something out of nothing. We're asking people to suspend disbelief for the promise of a still emerging, unfolding future. So how do you do that with integrity and with ethic? Because people are naturally going to be skeptical, and they're going to wonder, well, how much risk is involved here? You know, for me to like be a part of this, whether they're an investor, whether they're an early customer, in the same challenge as a storyteller. You're facing, by definition, skepticism and disbelief, especially if you're saying, hey, but look, I have a better way. Look, I have this thing that could make a difference in your life. Look, I have this product that you maybe never thought about, but guess what? this product can completely change how you relate to technology, or how you eat your lunch, or how you take your kids to school, or whatever the thing is. And you're like, wait, really? Like, it brings up so much. It's confrontative for people, and people don't necessarily immediately get it. So bringing integrity to the process of speculation is, to me, that's part of the dojo of what we're all in how we can be better champions and advocates of, as storytelling practitioners, of how we really help people to balance these different competing forces, so to speak, because there is, like, look, we all have business objectives that we need to achieve and hit, and oftentimes when we're working with a client or we're working in a big organization, those are really big ones that we have to hit and achieve. And at the same time, everybody's wanting to humanize what they do more and more, and so sometimes those things, there's a little bit of a creative rub between the two, but that's what everybody's trying to figure out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, always enlightening,
Always
Michael
good stuff.
Margolis, and I love the way you use language.
Well, my invitation to all of us that if you really want to go deep into story, it is all about language. That's and that's where we're trapped. So that's the danger if we just continue to go, oh, let me use story as my magic sprinkle on how I can humanize our business to dominate the marketplace and sell more shit. We're trapped in the exact same story that we are saying we're trying to transcend or trying to evolve out of, and language really matters. So and that's and yet at the same time you have to learn and respect the language of the world you want to be a part of. So if you want to be in business, you better learn the language of business. You want to be in marketing, you better learn the language of marketing. And our job as storytelling practitioners is to be translators, is to bridge these worlds and then give our clients and organizations this new language so that they can actually inhabit more of the kind of story that they want to be. Can I put in a plug for your listeners?
Not.
Nope. Nope, not at all.
So, okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
No, well, I was just going to mention, and I know Kathy will be there. I'd love for you to come as well, Brian, if you're around, and to all your listeners. But on October 10th and 11th, we are hosting our first annual conference. It's called Story U Live, and it's going to be in San Francisco, and it's being hosted at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, which is an incredible new state-of-the-art learning facility for entrepreneurs, and really about entrepreneurs from the middle. They have a really incredible values-driven approach there. And it's going to be actually a pretty intimate gathering. It's invitation only, but anybody who's interested can actually apply very easily at getstory.com. And we're basically exploring the business of story, the craft of story, and the soul of story, really looking at it from these converging dynamics of what's really practical in the world, but also honoring there's so much deeper that's at play here. And what can we learn from leading practitioners? And half the conference is a big open space type of forum too, where everybody can share their wisdom, their insights, their case studies, or gather people around a topic that they're passionate about.
Awesome. What's the date on that?
Yeah, so that's October 10th and 11th. It's a weekend in San Francisco, right in the heart of downtown. And then if anybody's interested in just wanting to go deeper into this work within our learning community, you can sign up for a free email course of ours. It's called The Red Pill. If you go to getstoried.com/red pill, you can sign up for a 10-day free course that will take you deeper into a lot of the things that we covered today.
Yeah. So it's not just story, isn't just sprinkles, it's the whole cake. It's everything on top of it. Well, and I laugh when you use that analogy. I just have to say, because so many times people will say, hey, we're human. And then it's like they're taking their poorly cooked cake, baked cake, and then they're putting pictures of people on it. And I think that the superficial cosmetic layer will somehow compensate for the lack of structural integrity and everything else they do. And when you talk about the sprinkles, I just had to laugh because I totally get it.
I love that. It's such a great metaphor. Look, we're all. Here's the irony of all of this, guys. We're all just learning how to become human again.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is what this process is of just like actually really exploring our and not even just learning how to become human again, but learning. See, it used to be all we had to do was care about maybe a dozen people or 150 people in our tribe. And now we're so interconnected globally, all you got to do is turn on the news or open your Facebook stream, and we're being asked to care about a complete stranger 12,000 miles away that's not of our kin, that's not of our creed, that's not of our ethnicity, that doesn't speak our same language or faith. Like we actually are having to confront more of what it means to be human in many bigger ways, and so this is a lot of what we're all trying to now figure out. Like what's my new point of orientation? How do I manage being in relationship to such a bigger world? And companies and organizations are trying to figure out the same thing. So it's a humble process, but the good news is, as you guys say with the DNA of story, we're hardwired for this. So it's just kind of tapping back into our innate nature and then contextualizing it to the issues of our time.
Mm-hmm.
We got this, man.
Wait, we got to end on an optimistic note, because then it wouldn't be right. I mean, that's the whole possibility story. There you go.
Yeah.
Michael.
Well, redemption song, right?
Redemption, that's right. No, Michael Margolis, thank you so much. As always, it's always fun to talk to you.
My pleasure, guys. Love what you guys are up to here.
Thanks. All right.